Well, I do thank the House. Can I thank the member for Ford for tabling the report and his comments about it. I don't normally, I might say, Mr Deputy Speaker, participate in committees that deal with such complex and difficult issues relating to financial affairs. It's not my area of expertise. So it was with a good deal of trepidation that I joined the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services to conduct the inquiry in relation to impairment of customer loans. But I did so because I became aware in my role as a Member of Parliament that there were people who had been dealing with one particular bank that suddenly found that they were on the brink of bankruptcy because loans that they had negotiated were found to be impaired. And I wanted to see a situation where we could understand what was happening and try and find a way forward. Now, parliamentary committees are probably not the best way to do it. If you read the terms of reference, you will look, and the minister at the table gave us these terms of reference, as I recall, you will find that we were asked to look at practices of banks and financial institutions using constructive default, security revaluation, processes to impair loans where constructive default, security and revaluation means the engineering or creation of an event of default whereby a financial institution deliberately reduces through valuation the value of securities held by that institution, thereby raising loan-to-value ratio resulting in the loan being impaired. The role of property developers and the practices of banks using non-monetary conditions to default or impair their loans to customers, and the use of punitive clauses as suspension clauses and offset clauses by these institutions. Now, I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't regard a parliamentary committee as being able to adequately deal with these issues, and I want to explain why. If you are going to inquire as to who is to be believed in relation to issues like impairment, you effectively have to hear the evidence from the party who believes they are aggrieved. You need to be able to hear the evidence of the people against whom accusations are made. And in order to try and determine the truth, you need to comprehensively cross-examine each of the parties to be able to find where the truth lies. When you've got a committee where other members have an entitlement, you can never get to a point where you are adequately able to test the evidence that is before you. So one should not be surprised that the committee, in its consideration, uses language like, if I can turn to the appropriate page, that we considered the allegations that there was a deliberate strategy by the Commonwealth Bank to over-impair loans in order to seek financial gain through a range of mechanisms after the acquisition of Bankwest. After considering the evidence and the responses it's received, we've not been able to determine whether deliberate impairment of loans solely motivated by clawback or warranties has occurred. The reason you can never get to that is you can never effectively cross-examine the parties and test the evidence. A parliamentary committee specifically was not able to look at all of those issues. But I wanted to draw a further point in relation to this because the committee went on to observe that while contractual arrangements associated with the acquisition of Bankwest may have played a role, the evidence before the committee strongly points to a culture of placing profit and return to shareholders against the interests of borrowers. The most interesting aspect of this inquiry to me, Mr Deputy Speaker, was that there was an opportunity to consider evidence in relation to two banks where there were suggestions that loans may have been impaired deliberately. and the practices involving each bank were different. Mr Deputy Speaker, for me, the Commonwealth Bank has meant a great deal. I have known many of its senior executives over a lifetime. I had one of its money boxes, which I'm sure most people will remember, given to me at school. I look at somebody who is contributing to national debate, like David Murray, who has been a very, very important leader in relation to probity and appropriate conduct. I look at somebody like Les Taylor, whom I knew as the bank's corporate counsel. I look at those who have followed and I cannot see people conducting themselves in the same way. The Managing Director, and I don't know on what basis the Commonwealth Bank were asked to take over Bankwest, but it is quite clear that having been asked by the government to do so, they were a bit worried about the nature of the loan book they received. And there's a Mr Narev, I've never met him, but he's made some comments that they thought they were getting a lot of lesser quality loans. Now that may lead to a situation where 2,000 loans were impaired. Might. They may have been lesser loans. I don't know. But what I am reasonably satisfied is that in numbers of cases there are suggestions to me that if the bank had been reasonable and would talk matters through and negotiate with their clients, they might have been resolved very differently. I just mentioned one case. A client of the bank's who was building units in Sydney found, regrettably, the principal of the building company that he had employed died. And he was worried about whether those who followed would be able to complete the contract. And he went to the bank and he said, look, I would like to change the builder, to engage a major constructor, Hornibrook, to finish the job. And the bank said no. And when the builder didn't deliver in a timely way the project, the bank called up its interests and essentially closed down the operation and sold the property, and I might say somebody else made an absolute killing in finishing it off. I would like to think that banks, when they're faced with a situation like that, would sit down with people and work out what is the appropriate way to deal with these issues. I know that they have not conducted themselves unlawfully, but I think they have conducted themselves in ways that are absolutely unconscionable in some cases. A committee like this was never going to be able to get to the bottom of that. But I think it's very important for a new government to be aware of the recommendations that are being made in this report, because we have to find a way forward where these issues will be addressed. I've encouraged the Commonwealth Bank, when they've appeared before us, to sit down like others have, and I refer to the ANZ Bank, with their clients and to work out where the problem was and come to a reasonable, negotiated settlement. The Commonwealth Bank has essentially refused to do it. I encouraged them, when they appeared before us, to put in place a situation of independent mediation where we would be able to enable people's issues to be adequately tested and to address the issue as to whether the bank not had acted unlawfully, because I am absolutely certain they had the best legal advice. They were never going to act unlawfully, but they have clearly acted unconscionably. And so recommendation 11 in this report is absolutely essential to provide a way forward. It recommends that lenders should engage independent experts nominated by the Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman to critically examine the contentious cases to determine what, if any, restitution may be appropriate in the light of standards developed by the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, with particular regard to unconscionable conduct. And that funding through a user pay industry funding model be provided to the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, acting as a tribunal, to consider cases retrospectively in the event that lenders do not choose to voluntarily examine contentious cases as recommended above. So the banks will have two choices: to appoint independent mediators and to work these issues through. And if they're not, there will be a body set up to consider those cases retrospectively in the context of whether or not their behaviour was unconscionable. These are remedies in relation to consumer protection that we expect in every other area, and it ought to be available to the bank's clientele. If you think I am passionate about it, Mr Deputy Speaker, I am, because I believe people have been treated quite unjustly. And I very much regret that the Commonwealth Bank invited to look at these issues, probably because of the enormity of the potential claims. Imagine if you've got 2,000 customers all looking for $1 million compensation, $2 billion might come off the balance sheet. Wouldn't that be dreadful? I mean, you can see why they may be taking such a view. But let me say, I did say to the banks during the inquiries, look, you ought to sit down and deal with these matters independently, and if you're not, you may be faced with a Royal Commission. I want to speak about that issue because some comments have been made that others are taking up the view that perhaps there should be a Royal Commission. I want to make it very clear that I support the recommendations of this report because I think they provide a better way forward. And that ought to be understood. Because if you had a Royal Commission, they would be merely doing what our parliamentary committee did before. They may be able to get to the point where they cross-examine and get a better understanding of what has happened, but at the end they will make further recommendations. It will not be the end of the matter if you appointed a Royal Commission. It would not be the end of the matter. It would be another inquiry. My view is that the recommendations that this committee has made to set up a body that will be retrospectively empowered to adjudicate on those issues is a far better way to go and will give a more meaningful result. And that's why I support the recommendations of this report. But let me just say to my colleagues at the table, because I know that if the government is returned, given the responsibilities that they hold, they may be looking at this issue. Let me make it very clear. I am a great fan of the Commonwealth Bank. I want to see its reputation restored. And I believe its reputation will only be restored, and I hope they're listening to this speech, or will read it. I hope they will recognise that it will only be restored if they are prepared in good faith, with independent arbiters, to deal with these issues, not in the terms of the lawfulness of what has happened, but absolutely in terms of whether or not the conduct was unconscionable. And if they do that, there may be some justice.